All right, was there anything else anybody wanted to raise under question 1? Yes, the gentleman here.
Just to say that I think everything's got to be flexible, because there are some locations where perhaps you could put in wind. I can't think of anything in Westminster where it might be appropriate, but also you have instances where everybody sings the praises of ground source, but if your building is above a tube line, you can't use that. So each individual case has to be looked at on its own merits, but basically everything's up for grabs.
Do you think there is any place for wind powered generation in Westminster?
Not that would probably be politically acceptable.
I think the top of this building would be perfectly acceptable for wind. I think it'd be ideally suited to wind. I think the important thing is not to preclude any technology. I think the gentleman at the front got it absolutely right. You drive down the demand as low as you possibly can passively, and that means starting with an approach to design which is contextual, not only the physical context of a site, but its environmental context. And once you've done all of that stuff, you then look and assess all of the technologies. You don't preclude any of them.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I'd just like to say I think it's worth just biting the bullet and going for wind installations in an urban environment, even if they are vertical wind turbines, not necessarily the horizontal ones. There are technologies out there. It's worth trying it simply because at some stage, once people start seeing that as part of an acceptable view of the landscape, people will adapt. Obviously, there are conservation issues that one does have to take into account, but a lot of the tall buildings aren't really visible from ground level, and you don't. So there are lots of high things like this building, for example, that are suitable for wind installations, urban wind installations, and it's worth pursuing.
Great, thank you. And the gentleman here.
And just going on from that, there is an opportunity there where developers are looking to build high and intensify use, that actually it's a prerequisite and a requirement that wind is included as part of that development gain. And there's a significant advantage in terms of the output efficiency of a wind turbine if it's elevated. So maybe that's part of the development tax that says if you're going to build high-rise developments in this area, you have to include wind.
So as one of the criteria of a tall building.
Absolutely. And the flip side of that may also be looking at very, very small micro-renewables down to the level even of a lamppost. I mean, every lamppost is wired up. If you had a very small turbine, a very small PV array, and you're harvesting small amounts of energy very regularly over the whole urban environment, that again can make quite a significant contribution.
Thank you.
So can I just add to that my experience outside London is that small-scale wind is not economically viable as it stands at the moment. The world is changing rapidly, but as it stands at the moment, I haven't found it to be economically viable, but I think this gentleman's going to...
I was going to say feed-in tariffs.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to ask, has the council considered a sort of a carbon accounting system that would sort of take these issues into a single framework, which is, for example, taking into account how much carbon, as the gentleman said at the beginning, in terms of there is carbon energy in buildings, so maybe refurbishment is better than new build, that one then would look at the building and say this is how much carbon has been used, how much carbon then to make a more or change the building over, and then literally price carbon. I'm sorry, I'm an economist, so these things come out.
That's fine. I'll just hand over to the officers on that.
I think it's fair to say that assessment, we're looking at how that assessment can be made. And we're exploring it at the moment, and really following these workshops we're going to go away and look at some of the solutions that we can come up with in terms of responding to the issues raised here, and that will be one of them.
Sorry, can I just add to that as well? I mean, I don't want to jump the gun, but actually it does lead us on quite nicely to question 2, which looks at the sustainability statement, and it's something that could be done as part of that, but maybe we'll come on to that in a minute.
So just if you are going to price carbon, could you also look at use as well in terms of per person, per capita, rather than on just a simple square metre basis? You know, how intensively a building is used.
Thank you.
This is Liz Lightbourne speaking from the Environment Agency. I'm just talk a bit about the sustainable urban drainage systems, and in your briefing notes you say that you're going to implement those, which we support fully. We're just wondering whether you would be looking at certain areas that are at a higher risk from surface water flooding. The Environment Agency have just issued some maps which show where there are some higher areas more susceptible to surface water flooding. I'm just wondering whether you're going to do further research into that and base policies on the research.
I think from memory that's what we were going to ask, is whether or not we should have a great emphasis on SUDs in particular areas such as those that have already been identified for surface water flooding issues, or whether or not it should apply across the board. So I think we throw it again back to the floor on that one.
On that, I mean, it may relate to the state of the drainage systems, the carriageway, the pavements, and so on. The sort of sudden rain events and extreme rain events that we have, some areas are better able to cope than others, and that, I'm afraid, relates to how well the carriageway, the drains, and so on have so far been maintained. In many cases, there are huge puddles that occur very quickly. There are lots and lots of blocked gullies in the area that I'm familiar with, which is Soho. And after what you, I suppose, might call a sharp shower, the area becomes unwalkable. I just passed, in coming here, some Italian ladies who were probably swearing at a taxi driver who had literally drenched them by coming past, and the spray had gone all over their clothing. So it's also the rate of runoff as well, and the ability for the overall environment to absorb it reasonably quickly and consistently.
So can I just add, in the context of conservation areas and listed buildings, obviously Westminster is very unique in terms of the quantity of historically important areas that it has. The aim of PPG 15 isn't to antiquify these areas. It's not to resist change in any form, and I think there is a unique opportunity for Westminster to actually look at how sustainable measure could be incorporated sensitively into these areas, and not to set them aside as untouchable antiques that can't respond to the challenges of climate change. I think there's something exciting and something very pioneering that you could potentially do with your historic building stock.
Just to come back on that, John Willman, Area Design and Conservation Officer, we're actually at the moment looking into taking examples of buildings and finding out exactly what we can do to them that's sympathetic in order to improve their sustainability credentials. And we've also had, in the last year, 2 retrofitting symposiums, one in association with the Westminster Property Association. So it is something we're looking at. Thanks for the comments.
It was just going back on the drainage point before. I think the other thing that should be considered at inception stage of a design process is the use of the roof, both as an amenity space but also the inclusion of brown and or green roof solutions, which promote biodiversity and help to manage stormwater and rainwater runoff.
Okay. Thank you.